everyone, I'm Abigail, this is James, and welcome to another Two Kids interview.
We are joined today by Newbery honor author Margarita Engle.
Ms. Engle has written books for kids of all ages, picture books through young adult. Some of her books include Tropical Secrets, the Firefly Letters, The Poet's Slave of Cuba,
The Lightning Dreamer, Enchanted Air Forest World, Singing with Elephants, Wings in the Wild,
and of course, the Newbery Honor book, Surrender Tree. And last month, she came out with her newest book, Sculptures of Life.
And on April 23rd, 2024, her new young adult book, Wild Dreamers, will come out. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Why do you enjoy writing books in verse?
You know, I used to try to come up with really complicated answers to that question because there's so many things about poetry that I love. But then I realized that the real truth is a simple one. Poetry makes me happy. I enjoy it. Poetry is musical language. And just as you might enjoy music, I enjoy the music of language. So I enjoy that experience of writing in musical language, and I love to read poetry too, and I hope that you will love to read poetry.
You wrote a book about the Holocaust. Not many people know that refugees ended up in Cuba. How much research went into that book, and why did you think it was important to write?
That one I wrote quite a long time ago, when most of my books were historical first novels. Now I've switched to more contemporary themes. I'm writing about books set in the present. But while I was writing the historical novels, I often chose topics that were just exactly what you said, things that so many people didn't seem to be aware of. And the reason I chose that one was that the Holocaust refugees who were accepted by Cuba were the ones who had already been turned away from both the United States and Canada. Their ships were turned away at the port. They were never even allowed to get off. And so they turned around and went back and asked for asylum in Cuba. Not all were accepted, but many people, many ships were accepted. And I think we need to be aware of our own lack of empathy sometimes in failing to accept refugees who are really desperate and have no place else to go. Because those particular ships, if they had not been accepted in Cuba, one wasn't. And the people who were sent back were sent into the camps.
There's more representation in books now than ever before.
You and your books are a part of that. Is that something that's important to you?
Thank you. It's so important to me. I was well into my adulthood before I ever read a children's book written by another Cuban American. And there just weren't any. When I was a child, all the books were about just a part of the culture in the United States. There was no diversity. Now I think it's very important that we all have an opportunity to read about lots of different cultures. It's a multicultural country.
Writing a book is a big commitment. Can you tell us how you became sure that this is the story you want to tell?
Writing a book is a huge commitment. You are right. And if I sat down every day and thought, oh, I have to write a whole book, I'd probably get scared and run away and go do something easier. But I don't do that. I sit down every day and tell myself, I'm going to write one poem. I'm going to write one page. And that's a mouthful I can swallow. It's like the old joke about, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? It's such a huge task to think of writing a book. It would be very scary and discouraging if you tried to think of doing the whole thing at once. But the whole thing takes at least a year, probably more. So for one day's work, one poem, one page is a good day's work.
What is the most meaningful interaction you have had when talking to a student during a school visit?
My most meaningful interactions have been when I've read a poem and a student has surprised me, and this has happened more than once, by standing up and reading their own poem to me in front of all their classmates. It's happened with a high school student, and it's happened with someone around your age. Now, the girl who was around your age was a Syrian refugee, and she read a poem about how homesick she was and how hard it was to be a refugee. The high school boy who did this read a poem about his own emotions. And after he did that, privately, his teacher told me that she didn't know he could read. She'd thought of him as a student who had not yet learned how to read, when actually he was already writing deeply emotional, personal poetry. So I think that poetry is a safe place to put our deepest feelings. And those are the most meaningful interactions for me.
Of all the books you have written, which one of them is most personal to you?
The most personal is, of course, my memoir. This is my childhood memoir, Enchanted Air. It's also in Spanish as Aire Encantado. It's the most personal because it's about my childhood traveling back and forth to Cuba before and during the early years of the revolution, and then losing the right to travel when the two countries became mad at each other. When the United States and Cuba got mad at each other, they both restricted the right to travel. And suddenly, my mother's family was cut in half. Most of the people were still in Cuba. Some were already in the United States. But we couldn't see each other. We couldn't write letters easily. Phone calls, none of that was easy. For 31 years, I didn't have the right to travel to visit my grandmother, great-grandmother, aunts, uncles, cousins. And that's just wrong. So I always like to ask people, when you get mad at someone, how long do you stay mad?
I don't know. It depends on the situation.
Hours, weeks?
Like 9 seconds about.
Okay, well, it's been well over 60 years now that the United States and Cuba have not had normalized diplomatic relations and have been mad at each other and can't agree on a lot of things. And I think grown-ups, who are the people who run countries, should be able to talk over their problems and find compromises and not stay mad at each other for so long, because every time that happens between countries, real families are divided. We see it happening all over the world now with various wars.
You write picture books for young readers, middle grade, and young adult. Which is your favorite to write for?
They're all so much fun. I love to get lost in a long story, like my most recent young adult novel, Wings in the Wild, or my most recent middle grade book, Singing with Elephants. Those are the books where I write a little bit each day for a year or 2 years or more, and I love to return to that story every day. On the other hand, the picture books, like one of my most recent is Water Day. These I can write fairly quickly, but then I have to wait at least 1 year, usually 2, before I see the pictures. I have to wait until the artist has done his or her part. Now, this one, for instance, the artist did something very unusual. She did all the pictures by painting and then cutting the paper. So you know how paper dolls are cut? It's like that, cut paper art. So each artist does something so unusual. This book, the artist painted on wood, and it's so beautiful. But the author and artist work together with an editor who's like a teacher, and in order to come up with the finished picture book. And the process is very slow, and it's just wonderful to finally see the artwork after that long wait. So I really enjoy both processes.
A lot of people here don't know much about life in Cuba. Why is that important to you to give us that glimpse into life there?
Good question. If you look at a map, you'll see that the three closest neighbors of the United States are Mexico on the south, Canada on the north, and Cuba just off the coast of Florida. So Cuba is one of the closest neighbors, one of the three closest neighbors of this country. And yet most classrooms just don't teach about it, right? I wonder why. I mean, it doesn't make sense. We should know about our neighbors. And ideally, neighbors should be friends, or at least not enemies.
What is your process when putting a book together?
Do you decide the end before the middle?
Or do you put it together in order?
Wow, you guys have good questions. Each book is unique. Sometimes I know how it's going to end. I have actually written the end sometimes before the middle. I've written the beginning, then the end, and then filled in the middle like a sandwich. Other times I start at the beginning and just write a little bit each day, exploring. I don't always know exactly where the story's going to go, but if I know, I want to know how it's going to end by the time I get to the middle. And yet I might write it all in order until I get to the end. I've never written something completely backwards, but that would be possible too. You know, start at the end and write towards the beginning. It's probably easiest to usually start at the beginning, then write the middle, and then the ending. The middle usually has many parts, though. You know, the beginning and the ending are fairly short, and the middle is a big, complicated story with lots of twists and turns.
We have interviewed a number of authors who've had books banned in certain places.
That means in those places, kids don't have the same access to books that we may have. It may not be able to see themselves represented in books.
Can you give us your thoughts on this?
It really upsets me. It's censorship. It's limiting what other people's the parents who are saying that they want to choose what their own children read. That's fine, but they're telling other people's parents what their children should not read, and that's wrong. I think that's censorship. It's actually very dangerous. It's eliminating certain ideas. This book and one of my others about a dog, a very sweet, cute picture book about a dog, have both been included in those book ban lists in several states, many counties of Florida, some parts of Pennsylvania, some parts of Michigan. I just think that it's not only wrong, it's illegal. I think it violates the First Amendment of the Constitution, which guarantees us freedom of expression. That's for me to write whatever I want to write, and freedom of speech to say whatever we want to say. Freedom to read is part of that freedom of expression. And I think they're violating the Constitution when they do that.
Objection. This is a part of most writers' stories. Can you tell us about that part of your journey?
Which part?
Rejection.
Oh, rejection. Oh, that really is just part of it. That's like the hardest part to get used to, but you have to, because every writer gets rejections. Even after, you can see I've had many, many books published, I still get rejections. And it's just part of it. But you have to persevere. You have to keep trying. You can't give up. If you love writing, it's important to remember that none of the rejections matter once you have one acceptance. So I could get 1,000 rejections for a particular story. None of them matter once I get that one acceptance, because that book will be published.
Can you tell us exactly where you were and your reaction when you found out you were a Newbery Honor author?
Thank you. Yeah, well, you know, they called me very early in the morning. I had just taken my husband to the airport. He had to travel for his work. I was in a big hurry to take my dog to the vet because she was sick. And I almost didn't answer the phone. And then when I did, I was like in shock. And what do you mean? Oh, no, I thought somebody was playing a joke on me. I couldn't believe it. I wasn't very eloquent. I just kind of stumbled around saying, "Really? Me?" It was wonderful. And then after I hung up the phone, I had to still go take the dog to the vet. So it still didn't seem real because I had to do my normal everyday thing, until finally the awards ceremony that summer, many months later.
What writer has had the most influence on you?
There are some Cuban poets who have had a lot of influence on me. One of my favorites is a woman, Dulce Maria Loinas, and my favorite poem by her is called En mi verso soy libre. In my verse, I am free. And she talks about feeling free inside of her poems. And that's really how I feel. Even when they ban a book, I know that I'm still free to write whatever I want. This book that was banned in so many places is about a girl who wants to play the drums. It's a true story from 100 years ago in Cuba when only boys were supposed to learn to play drums. Nobody thought it was appropriate for girls. They thought that drums were a men-only instrument. And this girl broke that rule and became a very famous drummer. So when I wrote about her, I was writing about her freedom to play drums, which she claimed for herself, but also felt, free to write about it. And even if they try to ban books, they can't stop me from saying what I want to say.
What advice do you have for young writers?
The first thing is to read a lot. When people tell me they don't have time to read, I know they're not serious about wanting to be writers. If you want to be a writer, you have to love to read. You have to read hundreds of books all the time, just everyday read. And then I would advise you to write from the heart, say what you really want to say. Don't worry about whether somebody else is going to like it. Don't worry about whether it's ever going to be published. Don't worry about the grammar or the spelling or any of that, because it can all be fixed later. I love to write first drafts. I like to write them with a pen on paper and then later go to the computer. But while I'm writing that first draft, I feel completely free because anything is possible at that stage. I can say anything I want, and then just, if it sounds bad, I can change it later. But I'm free to experiment. And so I'd really say, think of writing as a kind of exploration. Try it this way, try it that way, see what works. Don't get discouraged. Don't criticize yourself and say, oh, this isn't good enough. Because after you've rewritten it 100 times the way real authors do, it will be good enough.
Can you tell us about a project you were working on now?
Yes, my next young adult verse novel, this one comes out in April, is called Wild Dreamers. And it's at the stage now where it's come out in what's called an advanced readers edition, where I send it around to people who write reviews for them to read it. And then I'm proofreading it to make sure there were no mistakes in the printing. So I'm at that stage with that book. I've also written another, because it takes so long for things to actually get published. I've written another young adult verse novel that will be published in 2025. It's already been accepted. And then I just finished a middle grade book that was kind of not a sequel, but inspired by this one, Mountain Dog. A lot of students have written to me about Mountain Dog asking for a sequel. And instead of writing a sequel, I wrote another dog book that's completely separate. And I've just finished that one, just sent it to my agent for her to send it to my editor and see if she likes it. So I don't know yet whether I'll get an acceptance or a rejection on that one. But I do know that if I get a rejection, I'll keep trying.
Finally, it's time for Turbo 10.
10 rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
I'm not good at rapid fire questions, but I'll try.
Number 1, what is your favorite phrase to use?
Peace.
Number 2, what is one subject you'd love to learn more about?
The indigenous people of Cuba, the Taino Indians. Some of them were my ancestors.
Number 3, what is your go-to snack food?
I love ice cream.
Number 4, what was your favorite book growing up?
I loved The Black Stallion. I was always a horse person, but I lived in the big city, so I didn't really get to ride horses, except when we went to Cuba where my uncle had a farm, then I got to ride horses. But I always loved reading about kids who did get to ride horses.
Number 5, if you could teleport somewhere right now, where would you go?
Oh, I love traveling to Cuba, and I love traveling to Costa Rica, where I enjoy bird watching and seeing wildlife. And I was fortunate to write a National Geographic book about sloths and rescuing baby sloths in Costa Rica. So I love to go adventurous places where I see a lot of wildlife, but when I go to Cuba, I also get to visit relatives.
Number 6, if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Oh, definitely flying. I don't like being crowded into an airplane. I want to fly by myself.
Number 7, what was your favorite cartoon as a kid?
Boy, that's a hard one. A lot of the cartoons that we watched when I was a kid aren't really around much anymore. They've changed so much. I can only think of things like Bugs Bunny and Tom and Jerry. I don't say I love them, but that's what there was. The Roadrunner, you know.
Number 8, what is your favorite rainy day activity?
Oh, I read. I read on rainy days, yeah.
Number 9, if you could have any 3 dinner guests, who would they be?
Do they have to be people from now, or can they be from a long time ago?
No rules.
Yeah, I'm sure I would choose some poets. Some poets from a long time ago.
Number 10, what is the best piece of advice you were ever given?
The best piece of advice I was ever given was from Tomás Rivera, a great poet who was my creative writing professor. And I've already given you his advice. I passed it along. That was to write from the heart. To write from the heart. Don't worry about what's going to be popular. Say what you have to say, not what you think other people want to hear.
You were awesome. Thank you so much for doing that.
And thank you so much for spending this time with us.
We can't wait to read your future books.
Thank you. You're both really awesome. This is so cool.